Sometimes I let matches burn down to my fingertips just to feel something, anything.
LA Noire is the strangest game I've played in a long time, not due to a lack of quality, but rather its lack of complexity. Now let me start out by saying that for a 2011 game, this is a very good one, and one that I don't even think has aged half bad about 13 years later. I have 5 major points I'd like to discuss on this game: the length, plot, gameplay, setting, and the detective system. After around 20 hours and 26 quests, I can firmly say that the length of this game wore out its welcome. I was getting quite tired with the formulaic gameplay by mission 13, and they only got longer from there. I appreciate the game being longer rather than not, but it just felt like after the 18th mission or so, I was just doing the same shit every time, and by that point it felt bloated even if it wasn't. Part of this problem is that most of the characters, for me at least, felt boring, bland, and utterly miserable to be around. Mainly Cole, as I've never been a straight shooter type of guy, but I just found his hero complex to be annoying, and any attempt for him to do the right thing was just even more annoying by the time he cheated on his wife. The story follows Cole through 5 departments: beat cop, traffic, homicide, vice, and arson. Beat cop was like 2 missions, traffic was just homicide with cars involved, homicide was just the same mission repainted 6 times, vice was actually entertaining, and arson was a bore. Now Cole gets a new partner in each of these, and they're all unique enough. Roy Earl.
Since when have the police cared about dead black men?
Good point. We don't.
And Herschel Biggs.
Cole Phelps. It's okay, Brannigan. His name may be dog shit, but there's none in his hand.
Are the only 2 that I actually enjoyed. Roy was a nuanced character that was very much a good cop at some times, and a dirty scumbag other times.
I have a pet judge who hates blacks.
Herschel was just entertaining to be around. He was fine, but not necessarily nice about Cole's affair, which I enjoyed. Oh yeah, after claiming to be married with kids, he cheats on his wife around the 19th mission. This carried no weight because his wife and kids never showed up on screen until after his dirty laundry made the front page, and we see his stuff thrown out of his house by his wife. He never even said their names before that cutscene. Now, let me be clear, I wouldn't have cared about what he did regardless, since I found him to be rather boring, but I thought it was important to bring up at least. Basically, traffic doesn't matter. Homicide is like 6 cases that end up being done by one guy that you eventually hunt down and kill before burying any evidence of him and moving on.
Trusty. There'll be no more mention of him. The city owes you both, but there'll be no mileage and never bring.
Vice is where the greater story starts to show, however. This is about when the newspapers that you can collect start to catch up with the main story. Basically, there's a bunch of heroin and other stuff that was stolen off a military vessel and is being traded around. The big bad guys are Michael and the steward of Gondor himself. Honestly, the story doesn't matter. They're bad, and half of the upper echelon of the city's government is accomplices in some way. Micah is killed, and Denethor is hinted at being in prison for his crimes. But the most surprising part of the game, at the very end, Cole sacrifices himself and dies as he attempts to cross the border into Rivendell. Throughout the story, there are flashbacks of Cole's time in the military, and honestly, it's kind of just boring. I don't know, this entire game's story feels like watching any cop TV show meandering cases and happen to overlap at some point with a giant scandal at the end. Now, I don't have a problem with this. I honestly don't. I just have an issue with Cole. He's boring, he's not interesting, and most of his partners are equally uninteresting. Now, the gameplay is very much what you would expect from a Rockstar game stuck in between GTA 4 and 5. The gunplay is pretty straightforward with little to no recoil and a noticeable lack of aim assist. The movement and camera is unsurprisingly similar to GTA and uses a cover system. In fact, the only real complaint I have is that most of the time when aiming a gun you are defaulted to an inverted shoulder angle, meaning the camera is looking over the left shoulder instead of the right. This can be switched easily when aiming down sight, but still causes you to miss quite a bit before you realize it. The problems surrounding the gameplay stem from the fact that there isn't much gameplay. Over half the missions don't let you draw your gun, and if you ever get action, it's far more likely to be a car chase or a foot chase, both of which end when the game lets you catch up to the suspect, not when you actually get there of your own accord. Outside of the few times I got to go in guns blazing, it never felt like I was controlling what happened. It felt like I was putting my foot on the gas, but wasn't allowed to drive. Now let's be clear here, this, despite being an action-adventure, is more like an adventure mystery. There is very little action, and even less of it that feels exciting. That being said, I went into this game knowing that it wasn't an action game, and I'm not holding what this game is against it just because I wanted it to be better. Now the setting. This game is set in 1947 and is funnier than shit.
What have I done?
Didn't see that coming.
Most characters treat women and people of color with blatant disrespect, and I find it funny because I wasn't alive back then.
Sorry about this, Cole. What an evening I'm having. First a Negro puts his hands on me, and then this. Who do you think you're talking to, you German junkie whore? Don't you ever forget your place with me again. Do you hear me?
I don't know what it was like. To me, in 2024, looking back on the treatment of those groups is quite funny, because it's vastly different from their treatment today. Now, I won't go into politics here, I just wanted to note that you can appreciate the game's dedication to the time period, even if you don't agree with it.
He's a French Negro from Africa. Can you beat that?
The Congo.
Now, the detective system. The detective system is a set of smaller systems that form the backbone of how you solve crime. Finding clues, interrogating people, and the notebook are the three primary colors of this game. Finding clues is typically just walking around an area until your controller vibrates and you get an audio cue, pointing you towards an interactable object that your character draws a connection with. Interrogating people is a simple case of asking a set of questions and then picking one of three responses based upon either the evidence or suspect's reactions. The choices are between good cop, bad cop, and accuse. Good cop is just not yelling, bad cop is just yelling and threatening, and accuse is dependent on having certain evidence that you can link to it. There's only one correct answer per question, and while oftentimes it's more clear than not, for a 13-year-old game, I was surprised at how often I found myself unsure of which option to choose. This mainly falls on the fact that you don't know what Cole will use as the accusation before you click on it. So you may be thinking, okay, I'll accuse because of this evidence, and then his accusal implies something completely different that you don't have evidence to support. So most of the time, my failures when it came to questions was picking the wrong choice out of bad cop and accuse rather than out of the three. This game is renowned for its facial animations, and despite its age, I can't agree more. Most people look nervous when they're hiding something, but not all of them, and they all have different tells. Some people blink thrice in quick succession, some look down or will avoid your eyes. It's an impressive system still to this day, and I found myself relying on it more than I would have expected. With all that being said, we need to cover two final topics: the similarities to Mafia, and a sequel, or rather, the lack thereof. So I have completed both Mafia 2 and 3, and the similarities, I think, are important. The Mafia games always seem to be pretty heavily inspired by GTA's gameplay and the Godfather's themes. Why I think it's important to compare these is quite simple. Mafia 2 released barely a year prior to LA Noire, and 3 2 years after GTA 5. So Mafia 2 does a lot of things well that I wish LA Noire did better. Primarily, it's more action-packed, the story is better paced, and the protagonist is actually likable. Now let me reiterate. I liked LA Noire, and I liked its genre. That being said, Mafia 2 felt like a game that I happened to finish, whereas LA Noire was a game I chose to finish. Cole Phelps is basically just the American agent from that shitty show. He's kind and all Boy Scoutish one second, and yelling threats the next.
A nosy old hag like you knows everything about the people who live under her roof.
Where did she go?
He's always walking the straight and narrow, has a wife and respects her and all that, but we never see her, and he just ends up cheating on her anyways. Mafia 2 also just feels less repetitive. After half the cases in Homicide, I started to get extremely bored with the game. Every mission was the same thing. Walk around a room pressing A every time your controller vibrates, and then having your partner teleport you to wherever the next area is, before doing the same thing and asking about 15 questions a mission, with more than half of them having bad cop as a correct choice. Every time I walked into an area and my gun appeared in my hands, I was super excited for something different, for some amount of stakes. Despite being able to get questions wrong and convict the wrong person, there was never really any choice in LA Noire, just the illusion of it. LA Noire tried something that no other game, to my knowledge, seems willing to attempt, and despite reaching quite the acclaim, it sat without a sequel to this day. Here I am to tell you exactly what the sequel could be, and how I would do it. The Nemesis system. Now hear me out. I know that it's an action game system.
Double kill.
But imagine if it was criminals instead. You work your way through the small fish to get the big ones. And if you mess it up, then they get promoted and are more aware of your presence, sniffing around any future crimes they may commit. Now this is where I want to recommend an actual stealth system in relatively open environments. Let the player determine how they want to approach situations. Maybe you want to shoot a suspect for something as little as disrespecting you, and decide to plant a gun on him. Maybe you want to record evidence from behind cover and then arrest him the proper way. Maybe you send a smaller criminal that you have dirt on undercover with a wire. The possibilities here are endless. Obviously, we wouldn't follow the story from this game since Phelps is A, boring, and B, dead. If you want to make a direct sequel, I'd use Roy Earl. He's a pragmatic cop that toes a line between justice and knowing when to stay out of it.
I have a pet judge who hates blacks.
In fact, he was my favorite character. He had nuance, he was fun to be around, and he always played his cards well. He would be the perfect character to play next. You could turn him into a better person, his guilt at his involvement in Phelps' death pushing him to be a cop for the city and not himself. Or he can embrace his darker habits, enjoy a taste of the corruption that was absent in the first game. The sequel should be an open-world game that keeps the same format of the current, but improves upon it. Instead of walking around a house looking for clues by yourself, have your partner actually be useful and manage to find some too. This will keep it dynamic and not feel so boring and tedious. I think the Notebook is fine, but get rid of the crossing out of locations, as it makes it feel like you are just walking in and out of locations because you're supposed to, not because the player has any intuition. But mainly, when interrogating people, give me a dialogue wheel. Let me see what I'm saying and the context of it. Give like 6 options for differing angles and tone. The idea is to allow the player to end each case with one of 5 outcomes. Arresting the right person, arresting the wrong person, framing someone, killing the suspect, or burying the evidence. This allows you to be either straight as an arrow or more nuanced. Like I mentioned earlier, maybe you let a guy go free after murdering his wife, all because he works for a bigger fish. Maybe you want to take down the bigger guy. Maybe you just want an in. Either way, let the player craft the story. Let them make the character their own. If you add this to the Nemesis system and a corruption or blackmail type of system, you would have a fantastic sequel and a fantastic game.
Keep very still, Fleetwood. Don't give me an excuse to shoot you. Who do you think you're talking to, you German junkie whore?